So thank you all for joining us today for the Choosing and Being Chosen, How to Select a Graduate Program and Get Them to Select You workshop. Joining us today are Keala Kiko from Graduate Affairs. He's the Graduate Affairs Coordinator. We have Dr. Daniel Benyshek, thank you, Professor and Department Chair from Anthropology. Ashley Sylvester, Director and of the Student Success Pre-Professional Advising, and also Cindy Stella, Director of Admissions and Student Financial Services for the Kerkorian School of Medicine at UNLV. With that, I'm going to ask each of the panelists to just give a brief introduction to who you are before we jump into the questions, please.
Sure, I guess I'll start. Thanks for the introduction. Dan Benyshek from Anthropology. I've been here at UNLV for a little over 20 years. We have an MA and a PhD program here, and looking forward to sharing some tips on finding a good program and getting in.
Hi, I'm Cindy Stella. I'm from the Kirkorian School of Medicine. So we have the doctorate degree in medicine, and I work primarily with pre-med and those who are considering application to medical school. That process happens once a year.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ashley Sylvester. I am the director of the Pre-Professional Advising Center here at UNLV, and we help students that are interested in 9 different pre-professional tracks. So we are going to have a little overlap with Cindy. We help with pre-med, dental, PA, PT, OT, pharmacy, optometry, veterinary, and law. I've said that a few times if you can't tell. So we did just absorb pre-law July 1st, so that started as professional track. And we are essentially here every single day to help our undergraduate students become competitive applicants to professional school.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Kiko. So I'm the Graduate Affairs Coordinator in the College of Sciences. I oversee recruitment and admissions and funding our graduate students in the College of Sciences. So those are the master's and PhD programs in sciences. And I also oversee all the administrative processes, everything from our systems to, like I said, funding our grad students, scholarships, fellowships, all the paperwork and all the progression issues throughout our graduate programs in sciences.
Excellent. Thank you all for those great introductions. And let's just go ahead and get to it. So the first question to the panel, what are some strategies that students can implement to help them stand out when applying to a graduate program? Anyone can take the floor.
Yeah, you know what, and I'll say right off, I think there's probably going to be, this will become clear during the course of our workshop today. There's some important differences between applying to professional schools like a dental school or a med school or law school versus, let's say, the sciences or the social sciences and humanities. I think there's some really important differences there. And also some important differences, at least for the social sciences and humanities, with respect to a master's program versus a PhD program. So with all that said, I'm just going to be speaking here from the social science, liberal arts, and humanities side of things. I think one of the things that you can do is, because you're going to be probably looking to work with an individual rather than looking for a program or a highly rated program or a highly esteemed program, you're going to be looking to work with a person who has shared research interests with your own. And so I think making introductions, I think reaching out to potential advisors is a really important first step. And not all applicants do that. You can ask for a telephone conversation or to chat via email. But having that personal connection with a potential advisor is a really important first step. And again, I think in these other programs, you're not necessarily identifying an advisor for your graduate work. So obviously some clear differences there, but that's one obvious sort of tip right off the bat.
I would say from a standpoint of a professional program such as medicine, you definitely want to identify as early as possible in your undergraduate studies, or even if you're done with your undergraduate studies, you're in a gap year and you're still considering medical school, solely because there's a lot of different pieces to put into place. Medical school is highly competitive. Just to give you an idea, we get about 1,500 applications per year for 66 seats. We interview about 300, so you can start to do some of those ratios. And each medical school will have different nuances, and that's where somebody like Director Ashley Sylvester comes into play with her division to help you prepare and understand each of the different medical school nuances and where you may fit in. The other thing too is admissions committees really want to know that you are sure of this decision. For us to give one of those 66 seats to you as an applicant, we need to make sure that you're really dedicated to medicine. And so getting some different experiences along the way also makes a big difference.
Absolutely, and you'll probably hear a little bit of overlap with Cindy and I's answers today, but I'll try to keep more on the other non-med side of things. So I think when I saw the question and thinking about standing out, that's a very popular question we get from our students all the time because the path to professional school is so competitive. A lot of students, kind of the first thing they ask really is, well, how do I stand out? What's going to make me unique? And for us, as long as we've been in this profession and talking to admissions officers, going to our conferences, I think it kind of comes down to a couple of things. One, which Cindy just mentioned, which is this is a very long process. We say it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. And so a lot of that really is because you need to develop years worth of experiences between clinical environments, shadowing, research, leadership, the community service, I think is a very big piece to every professional school application, whether you're med, dental, PA, they're all looking for a lot of community service. And so it takes a very long time to develop a depth in your experiences. You can't really just decide one day, well, I'm going to apply to, OT programs in 2 months. That's not the way it works. So, really making yourself unique and stand out is by having a plethora of diverse and longitudinal experiences. And I think that really goes down to the foundational piece of motivation for whatever track it is that you're interested in going into. I think what will help in terms of strategies and making you unique is two things. One, knowing and being able to demonstrate that you are passionate about this career. Everybody can say, like, I just want to be a doctor, I want to be a dentist, but if you do not have the experiences and the passion to talk about why more than surface level, then the admissions committee is going to have a hard time accepting you as an applicant. So I think what makes you unique is knowing to the core that this is your path and having those experiences that really back that up. And then the other piece too is knowing your value that you're going to bring to that particular career, right? We talk a lot in our office about holistic admissions, about finding schools that you're a fit for. But I think, strategically, you also have to figure out what value am I going to bring to that professional school and that program. And that's what's going to make you unique. It's not necessarily because you're a professional rock climber, which would be cool, or, you've played the violin for 30 years, which would be cool as well. Those are good, but you have to know your value and what you are going to bring to that professional track, and that's what's going to make you stand out from your other applicants. So
I will echo all of that and basically just add, I guess, my perspective of how I see things from graduate programs, admissions, and recruitment from College of Sciences. But I'll try to be broad because I know all of you have different backgrounds, different academic disciplines. So definitely, yes, it's a marathon. It's something that you should do a lot of research online when you're looking at your graduate programs that you're interested in, or whatever universities that you're targeting based on what your fields or academic disciplines are. Start early, start looking on the department websites, university websites, the graduate catalogs. Just like you have undergrad catalogs, there's graduate catalogs for every university that outlines every graduate program, what their admission requirements are, what the degree requirements are, and also it gives a little glimpse of what that graduate program is at that specific university. So look at the admission requirements and plan your timeline. Look at graduate admission deadlines. They vary throughout universities. Some universities have much earlier deadlines, especially if it's a very competitive top tier research university, or if it's a very competitive program. All graduate programs are competitive, but you obviously have different tiers depending on the disciplines that you're interested in. But look at admission deadlines. What are the admission requirements? and then start looking at how are you going to stand out. Because every applicant is going to make the GPA requirement. If the GRE exam is required, they're all going to do, pretty well to meet all of those admission requirements, but you're going to have to stand out. So you have to have good letters of recommendations, and that's where it takes the time. So in sciences, a lot of our programs require undergrad research experience. So you have to take the time of finding a research mentor and getting undergrad research experience. Some graduate programs or fields don't require research. It varies depending on the discipline that you're looking into. You can also look at internship opportunities. It really is about networking with faculty and really spending a lot of time talking to people, and not just faculty, but also graduate students as well. Remember, whatever discipline you're in, you should come across grad students, whether they may be teaching labs or they may be teaching assistants, or you just may come across them networking with faculty. They obviously went through it, so pick their brains. The graduate students in those specific disciplines, ask them questions about how did they decide to come to UNLV or other programs. A lot of them may have been to several programs, whether they got their master's somewhere else, but talk to graduate students, do a lot of networking, and it takes time. So you want to build your resume or your CV, and that takes time because you want to stand out, right? It's not just meeting the admission requirements, but you have to think about what's going to make you pop, because when that admissions committee reviews dozens or sometimes hundreds of applications, you have to stand out. So there's something called a personal statement or a letter of intent that all graduate admissions programs require. So take the time of writing a good personal statement or a letter of intent. And you really have to target yourself toward, it's like a cover letter for any job interview. You have to take the time of why do you want to be admitted to that program? Why did you pick that university or that graduate program? And what can you add to them? You also want to take the time of looking at the faculty, what their research profiles are, and do your homework. You got to spend a lot of time researching many graduate programs. And I would say cast your net wide is what I tell all prospective grad students that I talk to or I have meetings with. Cast your net wide is look at many schools. Even if you just want to target, you just know you want to go to just one school. It doesn't hurt to cast your net wide and just look at other programs. And I always say you want to have backups as well. You want to have your top choices, but then you have to cast your net wide and look at, it's very competitive. So you have to know what your skill set is, what your experiences are. And the more time you do all of that research, you will know how competitive you are. But you want to cast your net wide and always have other target programs. As I say, you might want to have a plan B or plan C, just in case your top choice doesn't work out, because it's very competitive.
Excuse me, I'm sorry, if I may, just one other quick thing regarding reaching out to potential faculty, potential advisors. Folks, be professional, work on your professionalism at that point. So if you're reaching out via email, proper punctuation, no emojis, proper citations, know who you're speaking to, and come across as a serious and professional student. And again, I would certainly make sure that you're speaking directly to that individual's expertise and that of the program. So do a little homework ahead of time, be professional as you present yourself.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I feel like this is super helpful for the students just because we have such like a broad, you guys cover basically the full range for you together. So that's great. Okay, let's get into the next question. Are some factors weighed differently when applying to a traditional graduate program versus a professional graduate program or graduate school?
My guess is probably yes. But there are some similarities, like you were just speaking to personal statements and some of those types of things, and that exists in professional applications as well. I would say for something like medical school, obviously your grades are very important. Standardized tests are very important. It'd be the MCAT for medical school. We here at UNLV specifically, and this will vary from medical school to medical school, we give priority to Nevada residents and those with significant ties to our state. So it is more difficult to compete as an out-of-state Western region applicant who has no ties to our state. So it's probably something that's a little bit different. Some medical schools or some of the other programs probably take nationwide in their pools. So that is a factor. Obviously, experiences for more traditional pathways like masters and PhDs, where you're kind of moving towards being potentially a professor or research. For medicine, your experiences are more related to the profession, like shadowing, doing scribing, being in clinical settings. So that's a little bit different. We don't necessarily require research for our application. It's kind of a neutral component for us. If you have it, that's great. If you don't, that's okay as well. But medical school to medical school, that is going to vary too. Some medical schools are very research centric. We are community-based medical school. And so community service is very big. Doing those things longitudinal, again, is very important. For example, just like one Saturday with like Habitat for Humanity doesn't mean as much in your application as spending a year with that organization. So that may be some of the experiential things are a little bit different. I'll let our other schools kind of answer that, or even Ashley speak to that from the different professional programs.
Right, and I think I had experiences jotted down in the sense of programs like PT, OT, PA are like programs that do have specific requirements when it comes to shadowing, or what we call direct patient care hours. So in a lot of our professional programs, we want everybody to build their experiences through all of the different facets that I mentioned before: clinical, community service, leadership, research, involvement on campus, employment, et cetera. But I think factor-wise, as far as what's weighed, there are some certain requirements within a few of the programs. PT and OT often have very specific shadowing requirements and hours that students have to complete before they apply. But I think the biggest is the direct patient care hours for PA, for physician assistant school. You are going to need anywhere from 500 to 3,000 required hours of direct patient care before you even apply. But that's on the low end, right? Most of our PA applicants have thousands and thousands and thousands of hours of direct patient care. So that's more of a technical difference, I think, between programs. That is the more of the healthcare related and requirement with the hours when we're looking at, you know, traditional grad programs versus professional schools.
You know, I'll add that especially for PhD programs, this is less so the case for master's programs, at least in the social sciences and humanities. But for us in the social sciences, I think there's a difference in terms of things like your statement of intent, the cover letter that accompanies your application. For the professional schools, I think there's, rather than talking about your broad professional goals, you know, I want to be a physician, and this is why I want to be a physician. I've always known I wanted to be a physician or a lawyer or the like. For PhD programs in particular, you have to be much more specific than I want to be an academic. I think I want an academic career as a PhD. You really have to have your letter speak to a specific research interest. And again, this is where your previous communications with your potential advisor is going to help, because you're going to be able to say, this is a wonderful program for me because you have one of the leading experts in the field that I'm interested in, and I'm interested in these questions or these hypotheses. And that's really going to help you, because we do get very generic sorts of cover letters. So people say, I just love anthropology. I want to be an anthropologist, and I want to commit my life to this discipline. But without that specificity, you're really not going to be able to be competitive with other people that have very clear interests for their research. So I think that would be another big difference between those sorts of letters of intent for professional schools versus grad school.
Yeah, I would add to all of that and just say, yeah, there's big differences between pre-professional programs versus grad programs. And it really varies. So you want to always check what the admission requirements are in the graduate catalog or the department websites. And then if you need clarity or anything like that, you can always send an email or contact the graduate coordinator of that graduate program to get clarification on certain things that may not be very explicit in the admission requirements, whether it's on the department website or the graduate catalog. As far as sciences, we have 7 graduate programs, so they do vary. Most of our graduate programs in sciences, the faculty tend to want to see that prospective grad students have some kind of undergrad research experience, and they're looking for that in their personal statements or the letter of intents. And ultimately, all of these things get ranked or weighted by the admissions committees when they're looking at recommendation letters, personal statements, they're reviewing transcripts and all of that. And then ultimately the top students get interviewed. And then that's like the next tier to really determine, all right, all of these students meet our admission requirements. They all seem qualified and a good fit for our graduate program. Now let's interview them. And then from there, the departments make their decisions on what students they want to give admission letters to and funding graduate assistantships or research assistantships. So as far as all the requirements, like I said, it varies with programs. If you're interested in College of Sciences graduate programs, you can always shoot out an email to me or contact me to get an appointment, or we can discuss these things over phone or however you prefer, because it varies between programs. I would also add a big difference between GPA differences between med school and pre-professional programs. In graduate programs, we are much more flexible with that. Obviously, we pay attention to transcripts and GPA. We obviously want you to be doing well, showing us that you can master whatever the field is of that grad program that you are applying to. So they will look at the upper division courses within that academic discipline. But there's flexibility with that. So even if the program requires a minimum 3.0 GPA, there's things that our admissions committee realizes that, sometimes, students struggle in their first or second year for whatever reasons. College students are young, or, there's life issues and challenges that we have. And sometimes if you do really bad, a couple semesters early in your undergraduate career, that can absolutely wreck your GPA. And there's no way you're going to have like a 3.7 plus GPA when you graduate. That may be a total blow for med school. But in graduate programs, it's not the end of life. We will look at the last 2 years of your program when you're really a junior and senior. And if you're showing us that you're getting all A's and B's, we can overlook and see, yeah, you struggled in your freshman or sophomore year, you had a really bad semester, because, life issues happen. But so we have those kind of things where we will focus on your last 2 years, and we can always calculate that GPA for last. And if that GPA is stellar in the last 2 years, we can overlook grade discrepancies for grad programs. But then everything else gets weighted, right? Then we'll be looking at your recommendation letters and your letter of intent or personal statement. And then there's often interviews later. So there's flexibility with some of those admission requirements, but it's always on a case-by-case basis, reviewing everything. It's admissions process is, we all know it's long and complex. It's a very long, complex process.
I'll add one other thing, because the issue of letters of recommendation has come up. That's something that we all share in our graduate programs, and they're very, very important, extremely important, I would say, at least in our disciplines. And I think that they are in the other disciplines as well. And this is important to think about that now, because if you're a sophomore or a junior or a senior in your senior year now, and you're thinking about graduate professional school, you need to be able to reach out to professors that know you by name, know a little bit about your background, be able to speak personally about your achievement in their class and in their programs as undergraduates. Getting general letters of recommendation from a professor that you had that you did well in their class, you got an A, but they write your letter of recommendation and say, yes, I know this student and they got an A in my class, but I really can't tell you much else about them. This is a very, very poor letter of recommendation. It's going to hurt you rather than help you. You need to develop those relationships with your professors now. Go to office hours to ask them about their research. That's always a good strategy. They'll be happy to talk to you about that for a long time. and show interest and tell them, be able to have the opportunity to tell them about yourself and about your interests. And then that will find its way into your letter of recommendation if you're a good student, and that'll make it much stronger. So that's where planning ahead of time is really, really important, because if you're scrambling for people to write your letters of recommendation once you've graduated, this can be a real problem if you haven't laid the groundwork ahead.
And professional programs will be a little bit more diversified. While you'll need some faculty letters exactly described, as Dr. Benyshek said, you'll also need experiential letters. So the physicians that you shadow with or that you do scribing with, or your community service and who the leaders are in those organizations. So it won't just be faculty letters. It's going to be more of a broader mix of all the things you need to bring. And then when it comes to admissions applications, you'll also find professional schools, they're not controlled by the university. We actually have to use a national system. For MD school, it's AMCAS. I'm sure Ashley can rattle off every other system for every other professional program because they all vary. So there's some things that aren't in our controls, like we don't have exceptions to minimum GPA. If you don't hit minimum GPA or you don't hit minimum MCAT, you're done. Because we do follow a lot of guidelines and rules to the allopathic medicine study and how that is governed by the AAMC. So those are some things too that we don't have quite as much flexibility.
That is a difference between certainly med school and social sciences, humanities, and I think the sciences too. For us, our letters of recommendation will pretty much strictly be academic letters. We don't want a letter from your manager where you work part-time. You might be a stellar employee, but that's not going to help in our evaluation of how you might do in grad school. So
especially if it's a PhD program on the PhD level, you should be focusing all academic. As far as master's programs, I think there's flexibility there. In College of Sciences, I mean, for the master's programs, none of our departments will ever say it has to be all academic. Certainly, I think if you have to go with your strongest and your best. So if you have a supervisor that knows you well, or maybe something that you did community service work, or you did an internship with, and if that's a strong recommendation letter for you, you should certainly go with your best. And so having one non-academic, I think for most master's programs is perfectly fine. But then you should always check with their admission requirements. If they're very strict about it, they should say that it should be all academic. Or whenever in doubt, you can always email and ask the graduate coordinator if one non-academic letter is acceptable. I would say for sciences, all of our master's programs, none of my faculty or anyone on the admissions committee would throw out an application because of a non-academic letter, because I think you should go with your best. So if it's 2 academic, 1 non-academic, if 3 recommendation letters are okay. For master's programs, I think most master's programs would accept that. But like I said, read the admission requirements on the department websites. And whenever you have any doubts, get clarification from the graduate coordinator to see if a non-academic letter is acceptable.
Perfect, thank you. This next question is less broad and more specific. It's asking about applications. So why do graduate school applications ask what other schools you're applying to? Will being honest hinder my chances into getting into a competitive program?
well, I'll go first and I'll be quick. We don't. I don't know many programs in the social sciences or humanities that do. There very well may be some, but I'm not sure what the rationale for that is. Maybe some of the other panelists here know about that, but I don't. We certainly don't ask for how many other programs you're applying to.
We don't ask that in sciences in your admission application. Now, when the top ranked students go to the interview rounds, faculty will ask sometimes in the interviews, and the reason why they will do this, you probably already can know, it's strategy, because in sciences, certainly in our PhD programs, we fund all of our doctoral students. And in sciences, even our master's students, we fund all of our master's students except for in math. Our math department only funds doctoral students and not master's students. But in our other graduate programs, we mostly fund even master's students on graduate assistantships or research assistantships. And these GAA packages or these funding packages, it's a lot of money because when you add in our average stipend that we pay our doctoral students is $20,000 a year. We cover tuition and health insurance that's provided with that graduate assistantship. And when you add up that whole package, it comes out to about $45,000 a year for a doctoral graduate assistantship. And that's for just that funding part. Science research is very expensive. So when faculty recruit students into their research labs, the equipment that they have to run, the cost of materials, and the cost of maintaining all of that stuff and their overhead and everything, it's a big investment. So for a doctoral student in sciences, the average timeline you're looking as a doctoral student is 4 to 5 years. So as a GA package, you're looking at like $250,000 investment for every doctoral student we admit and we recruit. And then even more, depending on that science research, because of the cost of materials and the cost of supplies, plus, other things where faculty want you to attend conferences and travel, things like that. They might be using their grants to supplement you and all of that. So because the faculty are heavily invested, not just with their time, but financially, and if they have grant funding, which many of our faculty do, they're going to ask these questions in interviews because they want to know. It's like, how many schools have you applied to? They kind of want to know recruitment wise, because if they're targeting 2 or 3 or more grad students in that cycle of admissions, they're strategically laying out. It's like, all right, so I want to recruit, I might have only 1 slot or 1 student I can admit. So that question does come up in interviews for sure. But you can see why. That's what I was explaining.
We're actually not allowed to ask that in medicine. Several years ago, there was actually a lawsuit that ended the ability for med schools to know what other med schools you have been admitted to. Now the AAMC will know, just because through the AMCAS, you only get 1 AMCAS application to scatter nationwide to all your interested schools. So obviously AMCAS does know, but they do not share that with us. So that would not be something that you would run into in a medical school setting anywhere in the country, actually.
Yeah, same for other pre-professional programs. They don't ask, as advisors, I can see on the back end where you're at, which is great for us. And we can help make decisions if you do have multiple acceptances, which I think is a question that's coming up here in just a minute, but you are going to get asked that. So.
I'll just add one more thing before we move on to the next question. I don't think that's something you should fret about as far as graduate programs. So even if you get asked that question by one of the faculty members that's interviewing you, because they're trying to recruit graduate students into their research lab and so forth. I don't think that's something you need to be worried about or get much angst about, because they're not naive. They know that students should be applying to multiple schools and programs. And so it's all part of recruitment. Recruitment is a very complex and tricky thing. So the faculty realize it's like the best students that they're targeting are trying to recruit. The reality is they're going to get accepted to 3 or more graduate programs or more. I mean, the best students, when we ask them, or if it ever comes up as a topic of conversation, they've applied to 5 or 10 graduate schools, and that's not uncommon for if you're a really good student. Like I said, you should cast your net wide and apply to many schools, especially if you have that flexibility. That might not be the case. Sometimes you might just physically just want to stay here at UNLV, which is great for us sometimes. But if you have that flexibility, you should cast your net wide and apply to many programs, and you just never know. And it just gives you more choices and more options in the end. Hopefully you get admitted to many programs, so you have a lot to choose from.
Perfect. I actually received a question in the chat. This is going back to the question before this one that you just addressed. The question is, if we are not applying to grad school until a year after graduation date, is it okay to ask for a letter of recommendation after we graduate and then save it for when we apply? I know some schools ask for letters to be sent directly to them. So what if our professor or person writing the letter doesn't remember who we are?
Yes, good question. That is a good question. You know what, I think my response to this question really picks up on the point I was trying to make earlier about do your best to make sure that professor would remember you a year later. And I can tell you again, after 20 years here at UNLV as a professor, the students, not as many students as you might think, seek out professors, make appointments in office hours, stop by office hours to chat, to talk about their professional goals, to talk about their desire to maybe go to graduate school someday, to ask about the professor's research. Not that many. And I think if you take the time to do that and try to develop that professional relationship with your professors, particularly in classes where you have a lot of interest and you're doing well, I think they will remember you. And I think it's important that they do remember you, that you make sure that you do develop that relationship so they can write you a really strong letter. And to the other point of the question, yeah, that's true. Most of these application portals, they'll require that the professor submit the letter directly to them. So it won't be as though you could stash that letter and wait anyway.
Yeah, there's that confidentiality factor with recommendation letters. So it's not something that you can get in advance really and hold on to because everything's electronic now. So when you apply to your graduate program, certainly I can speak for UNLV, but it's pretty much this is the standard. So when you fill out your admission application, everything's obviously electronic. You will list the names of the people that will provide those recommendation letters for you, and you have to include their professional emails. And then what happens is when you submit your admission application, the system will send an email to those recommenders. Basically, they'll get an email saying, you as a student are applying to UNLV or whatever institution to this grad program, and they have requested a recommendation letter for whatever program that you're applying to. And then that person will upload their recommendation letter electronically, and it goes into the system and it goes into your application pool. And you won't be able to read that because it's supposed to be confidential. You'll be able to see in your admission application because you set up your account and everything that, okay, the letter was received, but you won't be able to click on and read it and be like, oh, I don't like that recommendation letter. Let me find someone else. You don't have that kind of flexibility. And so it's not really something that you can get in advance or hold on to. So keep that in mind. And we keep stressing how important it is to network. And like it's something you have to put a lot of time into. And that's why you have to really strategize on picking your best people to write recommendation letters for you. It's something that you gotta put a lot of thought into it. And only you can make that decision because you obviously know these people and you have to strategize on how much, how well did they know me? Did I do enough research with them, or was that internship enough? Is there enough substance? We talked about this earlier, right? You have to stand out because you'll be competing with all the other prospective students that are applying into that grad program. So that's your competition, is that applicant pool. And it's the same when you apply to a job, right? When you're doing interviews, you're applying for that position and you're competing against the other people applying for that position. So it all comes down to good strategy, good timing, and a lot of being proactive and a lot of preparation.
You'll also want to pay attention to any rules. So for medical school, your letters of recommendation really shouldn't be dated more than 12 months back. So even if you're a reapplicant, which is very common in medical school, you'll want to reconnect with your letter writer. And they don't have to change the letter, but they would need to update the date just so we know that they still stand behind the letter. So that's something else to really think about depending on where you're applying to or what type of program you're looking at.
The only other thing I'll add is that for medical school with AMCAS, there is a service called Interfolio. So if you do end up getting a letter early and you're not ready to apply, you can store an Interfolio for free. It does unfortunately charge you when you pull the letters from Interfolio over to your application. But if you need a storage solution for a while, then you can use that Interfolio. It does not work with all professional applications, but for like AMCAS, it definitely does. So that service is available as well.
All right, thank you so much. We got another question in the chat, And it is about a different aspect of the application materials. The question reads, does UNLV have any test prep resources for students preparing to take exams like the LSAT, MCAT, GRE, etc.? And do our panelists have any recommendations for preparing for these types of tests?
Let me start with
I guess I'll go first. My center covers all of that. We do, actually, quite a few. So, the one great thing that's actually most recent is we had, several of our pre-health organizations do a test prep book drive for our office, last semester. So we have a full inventory of test prep books in our office now, GRE, DAT, MCAT, that you can come in and rent for free. We will let you check them out for a few months, so that is an option. Those of you who may know me, or if you've talked to any students who come and use the office, students will let you know I bug test prep companies for every free resource that they have. We don't endorse any companies like Kaplan or Princeton or anything like that, but we partner with Princeton Review on a semester basis. We do a week-long test prep series with them. So every single night, Monday through Thursday, like Monday night is MCAT strategy, Tuesday is DAT strategy session, Wednesday is GRE, and then you get a free practice exam. So we do that every single semester. It's always on our event calendar and the PPAC website. The Office of Continuing Education here on UNLV does have GRE and LSAT prep, I believe. So that's another option, is through the Continuing Education Department here at UNLV. We do also have actually a current pre-law student who is doing free tutoring around logic games for the LSAT. We have different speakers come in all the time that do strategy sessions for the LSAT, the MCAT. So everything's on our event calendar. The biggest thing as far as preparing, give yourself enough time,
Yes.
period.
Yes.
And when I say enough time, I don't mean cram over the 5, 6, 7 weeks of winter break. I mean 4 months. You have to treat preparation for these standardized tests as if you are taking a class. You have to have a study plan. You have to stick to your study plan. This is not the time to engage in procrastination, like, oh, I don't feel like doing it today, I'll just do it tomorrow. No. You need to have a well put together study plan that is in your calendar, and you have the time allotted as you do for any of your other classes that you're taking that semester. I guess one of the most heartbreaking things we see is students who continue to push their tests back and their tests back and their tests back and their tests back, and then they're paying sometimes thousands of dollars for applications to professional school without even knowing if they have a qualifying DAT or MCAT. Then they get their score back and they don't qualify for any programs. So you really have to engage self-discipline, have your study plan. We have lots of resources in the center to help with that, but you have to stick with your plan and allow yourself enough time to adequately prepare for these tests. If you would like a score that's going to meet minimums, but better yet, beat the average of what the schools are looking for.
Yeah, you definitely want to spend a lot of time preparing for the graduate record exam if it's required. And I will say that if it's required, do your research. You might notice that a lot of graduate programs out there no longer require the GRE exam for admissions. So for College of Sciences, I can tell you that biology, biological sciences do not require the GRE exam. They got rid of it 3 years ago. Physics and astronomy just voted 6 weeks ago. It's no longer required for admissions in physics and astronomy. Geoscience does not require the GRE exam. They got rid of it 2 years ago. So chemistry and biochemistry, radiochemistry still does require it. And yeah, that program. And the math department, the PhD program still requires it, but the master's program does not require the GRE exam. But in short, like I said, check the admission requirements. I think a lot of you will be surprised if you haven't already started looking at many programs and graduate admission requirements, but I think you'll be surprised many programs have been getting rid of it. How is it in social sciences?
So the trend is to make it, to get rid of it altogether or to make it optional.
For medicine specifically, a couple other pointers. Use practice tests because you'll be able to start to eliminate the sections that you're doing very well on, and then be able to focus on where you really need to bring up some of your test scores. Also, do not prepare during a semester where you're taking some of your hardest upper division work. That will make you insane. You want to be able to balance your coursework and then the components that you're having to do, such as community service or shadowing and preparing for the test. So centers like the PPAC can help you look at that schedule and kind of help you balance that out. The other thing too is there'll be recommendations for courses that you should take before you take the MCAT, because they'll just help you with some of those sections. And then the final part too with the timing is you may need to do a retake. You don't want to rush a retake because a lot of medical schools don't want to see you do the MCAT more than 3 times. MCAT scores are typically good for a couple of years. So even if you do become a reapplicant, you still really want to have a strong score so you can use it in a future application.
All right. Thank you so much for covering that to all our panelists. The next question that I have is geared more towards after you've applied to multiple programs and been accepted. The question is, what are some factors I should consider when deciding between acceptance to multiple programs?
Great question.
Who's going to give you the most scholarship? Professional school is not cheap, y'all, at all. No, but we really do talk to students a lot about scholarships, about financial aid packages. They can be very different. The process can be very different from school to school. But, you know, I really do think it goes back to what I mentioned very early in the presentation and the panel, which was your fit, right? So, you know, you could be accepted, and I kind of joke, like, to a medical school or, you know, a dental school in North Dakota. But if you don't like snow, you don't want to move to North Dakota, right? It's just, you really have to figure out where you're going to be the best fit. I think it's really important after acceptances, and I'm sure Cindy will talk on this, if they have any days for you to come in, like secondary type of days, for you to come in and revisit the program, talk to the students that are there. Those are really important to go to really get a feel for the school. I think especially in this world of more virtual, if you can go to the campus, meet the students, see the faculty, see the actual physical campus, the buildings, all of that is going to be really important. But I do think it's really just figuring out where you feel comfortable and where you feel like you are going to be the best fit. And there's lots of factors that go into that are discussed more on crafting your school list side. But yeah, I think finance is also, you know, like I said, big.
Yeah, finance is a big part. We see medical applicants with multiple accepts and we'll lose them to another school just because they can receive more scholarship. Also the notion of, can you qualify for in-state tuition versus out-of-state? Some medical schools, you may be out of state for the first year and then you can switch to in-state. Other medical schools, you're out of state all 4 years if you go in under that status, which is very expensive. But Ashley's right. We always say during our second look program, which is one of those immersion programs where you can come back as an admitted student right before you have to make your big decision, is to trust your gut. You're going to know where it feels right. We always tell people for the multiple applications to do that as well, cast a net, as you've heard here today. Because every school is different. We are more of a small group based curriculum. Like you don't sit in a big lecture hall all day, just being talked at. So if you don't like small group work, then we may not be the school for you. We're also not a research intensive medical program. We have research, obviously. But if you're someone who's almost on a track for an MD, PhD, that is not something that we offer. So we find that people who are really, really, really heavy with research may not be happy in our program either. So it's just where you're going to be able to reach your goals and have the type of experience you're looking to have. For things like medicine and other professional programs, wellness is actually a huge component of the experience. It is a high stress, high stakes school experience along with the profession itself. So you also want to make sure that the student life and the wellness and some of those components are there for you. And I'm sure obviously PhD and master's programs in other areas, there's just as much pressure. You guys probably also recommend a campus wellness too.
Oh, for sure. And I second everything that's been said so far with respect to this. I'll say definitely look at the financial aid packages, although financial aid scholarships less so in the social sciences and humanities. We're more likely to give you support through stipends, GA-ships rather than financial aid and scholarships. So you'll be working some, you'll be working, 20 hours a week as a graduate assistant typically. Look at those packages, look what all they include. Are they covering tuition? Is there healthcare, et cetera, in addition to the stipend? Also look if there are limits to how long you can have that. Are you guaranteed funding until you get your degree? Or are you limited to 4 years of funding perhaps for a post-MA to a PhD program? Those limits do exist and sometimes they're kind of in the fine print. So make sure you know about that. The other thing that I would say is, again, for social sciences, humanities, and maybe sciences as well, for MA and especially PhD programs, because this is such a mentor-specific, these are mentor-heavy graduate training programs. If you're trying to decide between multiple offers, a really important factor should be how well you think you can work with your individual mentors that are identified in each of the programs. In a PhD program, as was mentioned earlier, you may be working with this individual for 4 or 5 or 6 years, and having a good professional working relationship with them and the type of work. Are you a person that really likes teamwork? Is this a professor that has an active lab and research group and does a lot of group work, and you tend to like to work more on your own? What about your interaction style with your potential mentor? Take those things into consideration, because if you don't have a good relationship with your mentor, a good professional relationship with your mentor, it can be very, very difficult to see it through. And so I would say that's something to not underestimate.
I would second all of that. It ultimately will come down to your decision on what's the right school for you, what's the right program for you. The geography matters. You might not want to go to a certain area if that's not the climate that you like. So you want to think about your personal well-being and, what overall, where are you going to be the most, happy and comfortable? Not just the school, the program, but the right research fit, but also your faculty mentor that you're going to have this long relationship, especially if it's a doctoral program. So you have to take all of that into consideration. Also, the financial package. Are you going to receive a graduate assistantship? Are there additional scholarships that the program's offering you? Is that GA-ship, is it limited for a couple of years, or is there sort of an understanding that as long as you're maintaining good academic standing in the program, that the program's going to do its best to see you finish with funding and all of those things. So, ultimately, that all comes down to the ending part of the recruitment process. After you get admitted, you receive your funding letters as part of your admission. That might not always be the case. Some programs you might just get admission and it might not have a graduate assistantship or funding. So then you have to look at financial aid, applying with your FAFSA and looking at if you need to look at student loans or other opportunities as well, or looking at work and so forth. But overall, there's just a lot of things you have to consider, and it's going to be a tough decision, but it should be, because it'll be a big part of your life, whatever program you choose. It will be your life.
Yes.
Not really just part of your life, it will be your life.
You're saying you can't go work.
It will be your life. It will be part of your life for that time. So.
And if you're making the decision and you also have a significant other or family, you have to think about what your support system is. Being a Nevada-centric program, we find that it does help our students to be close to family. We have students who still live with their family and go through medical school. It's nice for them to have that base too. But we do have students who are married, students who have kids, and they have to also make the decision based upon what will be good for their significant other as well.
Absolutely, yes.
Perfect. I have another question that is more specific to the student themselves, but it kind of goes along for other people who'd like to know too, like if you switch fields during your graduate studies. So the question reads, in my case, I was thinking to apply for a master's in clinical mental health and counseling, but I was also interested in a PhD in clinical psychology. So my question is, if it is possible to complete a master's in clinical mental health counseling and then later in life apply for the PhD in clinical psychology.
Yeah, I think that that would definitely be something that you'd want to reach out to a graduate coordinator about. I think that you might, I don't know if you're talking about that, those opportunities here at UNLV or maybe more generally. But this is something that might vary from program to program as well. So those sorts of specific questions, that's a good question. And it's great that you're thinking long-term about this, but I think that this will be something to want to reach out to a graduate coordinator about.
And it's probably going to depend on what your end goal is, because obviously you could see clients in that type of setting. If you want to see patients, you would actually want an MD in psychiatry. So it may be kind of a different route. So definitely you would want to kind of discuss what do you really see as your career,
Yeah.
and then which pathway gets you to that point.
Great. Okay, let's get to this next question here. This is a really good question. It reads, I've worked full-time throughout my undergraduate program, and as I've had to pay my own way because I received no financial aid, I had little to no time to volunteer or get internship experience directly in my field. Would you recommend that I take a year off after graduation to work and dedicate my time to gaining experience in my field? Or would it be beneficial to take a year off and do something like that before applying?
Yes, absolutely. For us especially, you know, we tell our students, you know, even if you're a 4.0 and you are a perfect score on the GRE or the PCAT or the LSAT, if you've never stepped foot in an office of the profession you want to go into, professional schools are not going to accept you, because again, it goes back to the original thing that we were talking about earlier. You're not demonstrating your understanding, exposure to that field, or your true motivation for that field. We are seeing a massive uptick in the amount of post-bac students that we're working with at our office. And I think that we appreciate on our side of things, the students who do take the gap years, and I say years because many are doing years. I think average age for med school right now is 26 to 27 years old. It's the same thing for a lot of the other professional programs too. Students are taking time after graduation to immerse themselves in their experiences, to really solidify that this is the path that they want to go down, right? For all of the reasons that our panelists have talked about today: finances, fit, demonstration of, you know, exposure and your passion for that field. You have to have those experiences, and we also understand, admissions committees also understand, this is a very big sacrifice for the next 3 to, well, if you want to be orthopedic surgeon, cardiothoracic, 12 years of your life, right? So you have to be sure, and those experiences are the way that you do that. So you need it to be a competitive applicant. But more so what we talk to students is about, we want you to make sure that this is the right decision for you. And you can't do that unless you immerse yourself in those experiences. So absolutely, we are seeing an uptick. We are seeing the trend to take a gap year or two, really build your experiences, make sure that this is the right path for you, and then apply.
I think it would be a little bit different outside of the professional schools. I think particularly for a master's degree, let's say in anthropology, I don't think you would necessarily need to take that gap year. One of the things that we are seeing, there's much more interest in things like internships and professional development, and we actually have a new capstone course in anthropology where we provide an internship built into our BA program. And I think those are becoming more popular, and those are always good. But outside of those, for anthropology, for example, there's not many situations in which, you know, you're not going to go shadow an anthropologist
Right.
for a year before applying to grad school. They're more academic in nature. And so I don't think it would be absolutely necessary or even really recommended, particularly at the master's level. For the PhD, I think having some research experience is key. So if you weren't able to volunteer in any labs or do any other sorts of research as an undergrad, and many schools now, including UNLV, we have the Office of Undergraduate Research, which helps put you into situations in labs and working with mentors to give you some research experience while you're going to school. I think that those are much more important at the PhD level, but not so at the MA level.
As far as sciences, it varies in the program that you're interested in. So if you're interested in biology, chemistry and biochemistry or geoscience. All three of those graduate programs, even if you're looking at a master's program, the faculty are targeting students when they're reading your personal statements or recommendation letters that you have some kind of undergrad research experience, because they want to see that you at least tried it, because you got your foot in the door, you got some kind of experience, because that's kind of the test they're looking for, because there's so many students that get research experience and you'd be surprised they decide, yeah, I'm not so interested in research as I thought it was. It's just way too repetitive and boring for me. I'm not interested in this at all. And so in like biology, chemistry, biochemistry, geoscience, for those prospective students that I meet, if they're thinking about applying and they're already at their senior year and graduating, and if they don't have that, I do tell them that if you're interested in graduate school in those programs, you really gotta really check to see if that is what you really want, because they're recruiting students for research. And if you haven't done research, how do you know that you're going to be passionate about that research? So sometimes I always tell the students, but you have to decide if you want to take that time off, where are you willing to cut back on your work hours? Can you financially afford it? Do you even have the time for that? Because even if you find a faculty member that's inviting you into their research field or their lab, you know, their expectation is that you're going to put in about 20 hours a week. Can you even put in that kind of a time? Can you fit it in your work schedule? Can you afford that financially? So ultimately, you have to make the decision on what you really want and what you want to pursue. But in sciences, yeah, sometimes if that is what you want to try it. And if you have that flexibility in your life to do that, then that's your call to spend a semester or a year to get the undergrad research experience, and then make yourself a competitive graduate applicant to apply into a graduate program. Because research takes time. And even I meet with so many prospective students, they're graduating as a senior, but they just started research, and it's like 1 or 2 months. And in sciences, that's nothing. You can't, there's no data in sciences in 1 or 2 months. And when the admissions committee reviews that, they can look at, okay, how long were you doing this research project? And if it's just 1 semester, it just might not be enough. Now, sometimes it all depends on the time, right? How much effort you put into it. I mean, if you're putting a lot of time in that 1 semester research project, and maybe you did crank out a lot of data, and maybe that might be the case, but more often than not, research takes time. So even a couple of months or a semester is not enough. So sometimes you may decide, even if you're graduating, you're not competitive yet, but in another semester or another year, if I'm going to continue doing that research, then you're going to be very competitive. And so, but ultimately it has to come down to your decision. Because if you're already graduated, or in that part of you making that transition, do you have the time, and financially can you afford that? And then ultimately it has to be up to your ultimate career goals or what you really want.
You're better off to take a really productive gap year or two to put your best foot forward in the application. Because for example, in medical school, you really don't want to waste your opportunity to apply. Like for our school, our committee doesn't want to see a reapplicant more than 3 times. And it's expensive. You pay application fees, you pay test fees. So you really want to be able to put in the legwork, so when you come out of the gates with that application, you've got everything you need. So there's rumors about medical school and how gap years are frowned upon, but that is not true as long as the gap year is productive. We typically say we don't want to see that you just went backpacking around Europe. That means nothing to us, but that you're doing something. Even if you're working, we see undergraduates take a year off to just save some money. But in that time frame, you want to be doing community service, you want to be doing some clinical experiences, similarly as they've mentioned about research for their programs. So you're much better to pause and do what you need to do to not waste those application opportunities.
Yeah, you don't have to feel rushed that you have to. Your only option is, okay, I'm graduating in a year or 2, and then you have to try to fit it all in. It's not a bad thing to take a semester or some time off, especially if it's going to improve your application, because you're going to do an internship, or you're going to get some good experience that's related to that program that, and it doesn't have to be research. It can be an internship or just a job that's related to that program or that field that you're going into. So I tend to talk a lot about research with sciences, but that's not always the case. It all depends on what graduate programs and what field you're interested in. It can be other things that can improve your application and make you a lot more competitive.
Great. We received another question in the chat. This is from Matthew. It's a quick question specific to the School of Medicine. Does the School of Medicine still participate in the early decision program?
We do not. So we just recommend that you apply early. Priority does go to Nevada residents and then those with significant ties. And then usually a little bit later in the cycle, we look at our Western region with no ties to Nevada. But we no longer do the EDP program.
All right, great. That probably answers your question there, Matthew. Thank you for posting that. The next and potentially final question is about graduate assistantships, teaching assistantships, also research assistantships. So are these assistantships usually offered in the admissions letter? And if not, how can I respectfully communicate that receiving one of these assistantships would play a large role in my final decision?
Yeah, great question. And unfortunately, it's not standardized. Sometimes you'll get a letter saying you've been admitted to the program without being informed whether or not you received a graduate assistantship or any other form of funding. And I think you hit the nail on the head. If you apply to such a program and you're told that you have been accepted, but you haven't gotten word back yet on your assistantship, do just as you said. Write that graduate coordinator and say, great news, thanks so much for letting me know that I was accepted to the program. I'm excited about the prospect. But when will we find out about graduate assistantships? Because my decision will probably hinge on that factor. And we used to not announce our assistantships and our admissions at the same time. We got a lot of those respectful emails and we changed our policy and now we coordinate them. And so we can let students know, but so you'll probably see a mixture of those, but you can certainly reach out to the graduate coordinator and ask those questions.
Yeah, I would echo all of that and second that basically. In many cases in sciences, it's simultaneous or together. You'll get your admission letter and your graduate assistantship funding letter together. Sometimes there's a little bit of lag that you'll get the admission letter first, telling you that you're accepted into the program. And then the funding letter might come a little later because sometimes the information has to be put in, and in sciences, you know, we're complicated with supplementing our department or university graduate assistantships with, especially if grant money is involved with the faculty. But a lot of times that will be communicated to you. If you're a very good student that a faculty member wants to recruit, throughout the interview process, or they'll be contacting you and letting you know that, you know, you will be funded. They'll be telling you right away. If it's all included, and because and the other thing I would add, if the same thing, if you don't receive a funding letter as part of your admission after a while, you know, contact the graduate coordinator to follow up and ask if there is any graduate assistantship funding, and then they'll let you know. It might not be the case, or in some cases you might not have been given a funding offer letter yet because what we say in sciences is at the moment we have you on our GA wait list. And what that means is that we have to offer all of our admitted students with funding time. We cannot tell them, like, you need to make a decision immediately in like 2 days. If you're applying for fall admissions, there's an April 15 resolution where basically you have until April 15 to make a decision as far as funding. And that's to give all prospective grad students opportunity to apply to a lot of programs and wait until they get their admissions and funding offer letters from multiple schools and programs. And so if you're applying for fall admissions and you're applying in January and February, which is where a lot of the deadlines are, we're admitting students with funding, but they're not forced to make an admission deadline or accepting admission and funding until April 15. And we have to wait and give students that time. And then when we get the students and they're rejecting us and saying, oh, no, thank you, for whatever reasons, they're taking offers or going elsewhere, then that funding becomes available back to the department. And then we look at our GA wait list. And then we can contact students and say, are you still interested? We hope you're still interested. We can now offer you a GA. We can now offer you funding. And that might have to happen in late April or May or even in June. So that's something as well that can change, I guess, the logistics of all of that. The funding just might not be available right away because of the whole recruitment process and the time it takes.
But those might be factors then that help you make your decision about, what program you're going to attend, because you might be informed that you are guaranteed funding at the time of acceptance for one program and not for another, and that, not knowing that may be worth committing to the program that's offering you, guaranteeing you funding.
That's probably a good question about the increase of their chances for GA.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
The question reads, are there ways to increase our chances for graduate assistantships?
Well, I think these tend to be, just like the process in terms of applying to the program, these are competitive. And so graduate assistantships are one way of not only supporting our grad students to make sure that they're successful, but also to use them to recruit the best applicants. So I would say the things that are going to make you a really, really strong applicant for that program are probably also going to make you a really, really strong GA applicant. So just double down on all of that stuff and you're going to maximize your chances for both. Yeah.
Medical school doesn't have that structure. Typically medical schools will receive scholarship, and scholarship is typically need-based, honestly. We have some merit, but obviously medical school applicants are all pretty high on merit. So most donor scholarships or school-based scholarships are need-based, and a lot of medical schools you'll see a separate scholarship application. We have one if you're admitted, and our scholarship committee will then look at the funds for that incoming cohort and make a decision as to if we're able to offer you anything. That can vary from being a 1 year to a 4-year scholarship. It can also vary from being about $1,000 all the way up to covering in-state tuition in full. So that will change from school to school as you look at that process. Third-party scholarships, always wonderful. We offer lots of resources for people to seek out third-party scholarships. You can also go to medical school for free. If you would like to go active duty military, they have a program called HPSP that will pay your cost of living, textbooks, tuition, and fees. You can then do either a civilian or a military residency training. And then once you are a licensed physician, you do 4 years as an officer physician with one of those branches and you have no debt. So those are some options from that angle.
I would echo all of that. Just it goes back to what we've been discussing from the start about making yourself a very competitive applicant, and you have to stand out in that admission recruitment process when all the admission applications are being reviewed. The best students will always be funded in any program. That's what the whole recruitment and the competitive admissions screening goes with and everything. So make yourself very competitive. You want to stand out because if you're going to, like I said, the best students always get funded. And so the more qualified you are, the more competitive you make yourself, the hopefully better options you will have with not just admissions, but also funding as far as graduate programs. As far as in sciences, like I said, all of our doctoral students in sciences at UNLV are funded. And most of our master's students, we offer GAs too, and just not in some programs. But as far as, so it also goes to picking the right program or the right school. So it depends on your field, depends what program you're interested in and everything. But ultimately, this is make yourself stand out and look very competitive, and you'll get better opportunities and choices.
Perfect. Before we wrap things up, I have just another quick question that came in through the chat. It reads, how important is it that the master's degree follows closely to your doctor's degree?
Well, I would say it's not that important, at least in the social sciences and humanities, and I'm guessing also in the sciences. We certainly have, in fact, in our program in anthropology, large proportion of our applicants to our doctoral program every year are people that have received their master's degree previously, typically from another institution, and then have worked in the field as a professional anthropologist or archaeologist, and then decide they want to go on for their doctorate. So this can actually be a real benefit to these students because they have had, they've done professional work. They're obviously more mature individuals. And so that they're typically some of our strongest applicants. So at least for anthropology, and I think in general, in the social sciences, humanities, and sciences, it's not critical that your doctorate training follows right on the heels of your master's.
Yeah, I would say the same as well. Your master's and the PhD doesn't necessarily have to be the same identical academic discipline. It depends on how it's related. So when I'm looking at sciences, whether it's chemistry or biology or physics and astronomy, I see students getting admitted into the grad programs, even sometimes where the master's degree is not necessarily in the same field. It all depends. It's still going to come down. They're going to review, obviously, your transcript. So what's your undergraduate degree in? So if you have the basic foundation courses for that discipline, that's really what they'll be looking for. Because they understand that some students go into a master's program that's completely left field or in a different direction because they're interested. For example, you may have your undergraduate degree in sciences, but you may decide to go into business or something social sciences, or you may decide to just go into something like fine arts. And that's just because you chose to go in a different direction. But if you still have your undergraduate degree in sciences, you're still competitive to come back to graduate school in sciences. So I would add to that. So as far as our PhD students, when we admit them, if they have a master's degree in the field, we put them on a postmaster's track. And what a postmaster's track is, basically you get a credit reduction. Because obviously if you have a master's degree in the same field, the PhD, we're not going to make you take all those classes all over again that you've already taken in your master's program. So when they are closely linked, that's part of the admissions process too, and the faculty will decide that if you're in the PhD program, you're going to be on a postmaster's track, and you'll have less coursework and less lecture classes that you have to take. So all of that has to be taken on a case-by-case basis. So if your master's degree is in something completely left field, we're not going to put you on a postmaster's chemistry track if your master's degree is in fine arts. No offense to fine arts. But the point I'm making is that it has to be linked if you want to be on a postmaster's PhD track. But in that case, if it's not related, you can still get accepted to the PhD program, but then it will be on the post-bachelor's PhD because you didn't take the master's coursework. So that's kind of one of the other things that we have flexibility part.
And James, I'm sorry, I think I misinterpreted your question. I thought you were asking about timeline, whether or not it was important to quickly follow up in a doctoral program after you receive your master's. And I think perhaps I misinterpreted your question, and you were asking if it was important if they were in the same area or in the same discipline. And if that's the case, then I'll modify my answer a little bit. Timing, I don't think matters. I think it does matter that you have your master's degree in anthropology or a related discipline, let's say sociology, for example, to get into a doctoral program. It's not absolutely necessary. There have been some exceptions that I know of in my time here at UNLV, but it will mean that you will likely have more remedial work to do, even if you're accepted because you did outstanding work in, let's say, another master's program in fine art, perhaps. But there would be some background coursework that you would just have to have before you could move on to the PhD. And in fact, it would probably be very difficult to assess your qualifications for a doctoral program if you really didn't have any anthropology, let's say, up to the point that you were applying for a PhD. And we would probably wonder what makes you think that you are going to do well in an anthropology program, or that you even you even like anthropology, if you haven't had any previous coursework in it. So I think they would need to be at least somewhat related in discipline, if not from, say, let's say, have a bachelor's degree in the subject. Even if a master's is in a different discipline.
Yeah, if it's a gap issue between the timing between the master's or PhD, it's flexible in our graduate programs. I cannot tell you like an exact year cutoff because there's no explicit rules for that where it's like, oh, it's more than 5 years, we're not going to count it or anything like that. It really comes down to your overall, application and everything, but I wouldn't be too concerned. I mean, it depends on how long that gap is, but then there's no like an actual cutoff on that time, whether it's like 5 years or it's a tricky thing. So I don't want to give like a year or something or a time on that. Overall, it'll be up to the faculty and the admissions committee, and ultimately that faculty member that's going to be your research mentor and everything on how long they feel that gap is too long or not. But I mean, there's a lot of things that go into consideration.
Professional programs are a little different. Most of them, you don't have to have a master's degree to apply. You don't have to have a master's to apply to medical school. However, if you have an undergraduate degree with low performance, you will probably have to do a post-bac in some way, shape, or form to overcome that, to have a qualifying application. The things also remember in professional programs is that we have prerequisite coursework required to apply, and that can expire. For example, the prerequisite courses we have like bio, biochem, et cetera, have to be less than 10 years old. So you might want to look at admissions requirements depending on the program you're going into, make sure that there aren't some course requirements that would expire on that time frame.
And that's true even in some social science and humanities programs too.
Yeah.
All right, so we have reached 5 o'clock. I just want to thank our panelists so much for all of their great knowledge and expertise shared with the students today. Additionally, before we end today's session, I'd like to point out that I did post in the chat a link, and the link is to a feedback survey regarding this workshop. So if everyone can take a couple minutes to answer the questions on the feedback link, that's super helpful for us at the grad college. It really helps us to improve upon the workshops that we provide for you. And so at that, I will dismiss everyone. Thank you again so much, panelists. Thank you, participants. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day.